And welcome back, my fellow Inklings, to the Eagle and Child. Once again, the meeting place of C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, and others. Hey, fun fact. Did you know C.S. Lewis spent years as a committed atheist before he returned to the faith? He didn't come back because someone scared him into it. He came back because he slowly, reluctantly fell in love with the idea that the universe might be actually good. He called himself the most dejected and reluctant convert in all of England. Not exactly a fire and brimstone story. Which brings us right to this week's question. What if the most dangerous evil in the world isn't the kind that looks like evil at all? What if it looks like policy, like tradition, like national security, like the way things have always been done? We're in part 4 of our series on original goodness, on whether we are born broken or born beloved. And if we are children of original blessing, then why do we participate in evil? And today we're going somewhere that might surprise you. Because most of us, when we think about sin, think about individuals. Someone made a bad choice. Someone gave in to the temptation. Someone failed. But what if sin doesn't stop at the individual? What if it gets organized? Well, we live in a moment right now where that question feels urgent. Turn on the news and you'll see it. Nations making massive decisions, systems grinding forward with enormous momentum, and most of the people inside those systems genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. I'm not here to tell you which side is right or wrong in any particular conflict. That's not what this post is about. But I am here to shed some light on what Paul said 2,000 years ago, and that I think is more relevant today than ever. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world. Paul wasn't talking about individuals here. He was talking about something much larger, something structural, what he called powers and principalities. C.S. Lewis understood this in a way that I found both brilliant and a little unsettling. In the Screw Tape Letters, if you haven't read it, put it on your list. He imagines a senior demon coaching a junior demon on how to destroy a human soul. The senior demon doesn't say, make people dramatically evil. He says, make them comfortable, make them distracted, keep them sleepwalking through systems that slowly dehumanize everyone, while they congratulate themselves for being decent people. Lewis was saying that evil doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. It often comes wearing the respectable clothes of the way things have always been done. The Christian tradition has long described evil operating on 3 levels. And I want to walk through them quickly because they each build on each other. The first is the flesh. Now, many of us were taught that the flesh is primarily about just the body, about sexual sin or physical appetites. But Lewis actually pushes back on that in Mere Christianity. He says that most sins the New Testament most consistently condemns, like pride, self-righteousness, the hunger for control, are not bodily sins at all. They are sins of the ego. He goes further. He calls pride, analogous to the ego, the essential vice, the utmost evil, and says it was through pride that the devil became the devil. That's strong language. The flesh, in Paul's usage, is less about what our bodies want and more about the self turned inward, grasping for security and worth apart from God. At its root, the declaration that to God that we don't need him. The second level is the world, not the physical earth, which God declared good, but the organized human systems, economic, political, religious, cultural, that have drifted from their original goodness and now perpetuate injustice in ways that are largely invisible to those who benefit from them. Paul says, don't conform to it. Jesus says the world will hate you for not belonging to it. These aren't calls to escape. They're invitations to see what is going on inside of it. And the third level is the devil, best understood not as a villain with a pitchfork, but as the spirit of deception itself. Jesus called him a liar and the father of lies. His deepest work is not possession, it is distortion. It is convincing us that unjust systems are natural, that oppressive structures are inevitable, and that the people being crushed by them somehow deserve it. So what does this actually look like in history? The Salem witch trials didn't happen because one person was unusually evil. They happened because an entire community, gripped by fear and anxiety, built a system that directed its terror onto the most vulnerable. Slavery didn't persist for centuries because of individual moral failures alone. It was written into law, defended from the pulpits, embedded in economies, and rationalized by educated, well-respected people. The system took on a life of its own. Here's a more recent example, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions about where you see this today. In 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower, a five-star general, not a pacifist, gave his farewell address to the nation. And he warned about what he called the military-industrial complex. He said that when military institutions, defense contractors, political leaders, and economic interests become deeply entwined, a system can form that quietly perpetuates itself. Not because the individuals inside are evil, but because the structure generates its own momentum, funding, fear, influence, profit, and it becomes very hard to question or critique from within that system. This is what we mean by structural evil. Good people participate in systems that slowly normalize things none of them individually might have chosen. This system takes on a life of its own, and once it does, it has become exactly what Paul was describing. And it isn't only military political systems. We have watched in recent years as networks of wealth and influence have shielded genuinely horrific behavior. Not because everyone inside was monstrous, but because the system made the unthinkable feel protected and even normal. The prophets saw this too. Isaiah wrote about those who make unjust laws. Amos took a stance against those who sell the innocent for silver. Micah called out the powerful for using religion as cover for exploitation. They weren't primarily confronting individuals. They were confronting systems. The prophetic imagination is corporate. Sin can saturate an entire culture. And I want to be honest with you about something very personal here, because I think it matters. I have spent most of my life as what you might call a beneficiary of the system, a successful white male, Protestant, American, who has led companies and organizations and have been treated in most rooms I've walked into as someone who belongs there. Yes, I have worked hard. I don't want to dismiss that. But the longer I sit in contemplative prayer and meditation, the more I'm confronted by something uncomfortable. Hard work alone does not explain the life I've been given. People typically have returned my calls. Doors have been opened. I've been given the benefit of the doubt in situations where someone who looked different or came from a different background might not have been. I've often been given the mic to share my viewpoints. Rooms have gone quiet when I've spoken. I've moved through systems, economic, religious, political, and professional, that were, in many ways, quietly arranged in my favor before I even arrived. I didn't build those systems. I didn't consciously choose them, but I've benefited from them. And for most of my life, I didn't even notice, because that's precisely how privilege works. It is most invisible to those it most favors. A viewpoint, after all, is a view from a point, and I've been standing on very comfortable ground. The contemplative tradition has taught me that this kind of seeing, really seeing, doesn't come from argument or debate. It comes from stillness, from sitting quietly long enough that the defenses start coming down and the Spirit begins to show you what you've been too busy or too comfortable to notice before. Not to shame you, but to change you, to transform you. How did Jesus confront the system of his day? When Jesus walked into the temple and overturned the money changers' tables, he was not having a bad day. He was making a statement about a system that had turned a house of prayer into economic machine, extracting resources from the poor in the name of God. Many scholars also see this as a moment of something even deeper, a prophetic sign that the sacrificial system itself had reached its breaking point. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, Jesus quotes from Hosea. When he disrupts the temple economy and later predicts its destruction, He may be signaling that God's forgiveness was never ultimately dependent on violence in the first place. If that is true, then the cross is not demanding blood. It is God entering to our violent systems and exposing them from the inside. When he healed on the Sabbath and refused to apologize for it, he was confronting a religious structure that had elevated its own rules above human dignity. When he said, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's," he was navigating the complexity of living within a political power while not being owned by it. Jesus was not apolitical. The Sermon on the Mount is a social vision. The Lord's Prayer is political imagination. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That prayer doesn't make sense unless earth, as it currently is, needs to be changed. Now think about what actually happened in those final hours. Jesus was arrested in the middle of the night because the authorities were afraid of the crowd in the daylight. He was brought before a religious council that had already decided the verdict before the trial even began. The high priest, Caiaphas, said it out loud. It is better for one man to die than for the whole nation to perish. That is not theology, that's politics. That's the scapegoating mechanism dressed in religious robes. Then Pilate, who admitted 3 times he found no basis for charge, ordered the execution anyway. Why? Because the system demanded it. He literally washed his hands of it, as if a bowl of water could absolve a man of participation in injustice. And the crucifixion itself was not just a form of death. It was Rome's public message to anyone watching. This is what happens when you challenge the powers. And here's something we don't talk about enough. When the soldiers came to arrest Jesus in the garden, Peter did what I think hopefully most of us would think we should do. He pulled out a sword, and Jesus stopped him cold. Put your sword away. And then in one of the most quietly stunning moments in all of Scripture, Jesus reached out and healed the ear of the soldier who had come to arrest him, the man who was part of the system closing in to execute him. Jesus healed him. That's not weakness. That is the most radical kind of strength there is. Jesus understood something we are still struggling to learn, that violence doesn't end cycles, it feeds them. He didn't just teach nonviolence. He practiced it at the moment. It cost him everything. And then on the cross, he absorbed the worst that organized power could deliver. And he responded with forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Not revenge, not withdrawal, forgiveness and exposure. In doing so, he exposed the lies at the heart of every system that uses violence to maintain order. What are the lies? That domination is strength, that silencing a voice destroys it, that death is the final word. It wasn't, and that is the point, and that is what Christianity stands for. Like it or not, nonviolence is what it means to follow the way and the truth and the life of Jesus. This is what it means to take up your cross and follow Jesus. So where does that leave us? Paul says, once again, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He's not just talking about personal piety. He's describing a whole change in perception, the ability to see what the systems around us normalize and to refuse to be conformed to it. That kind of seeing doesn't happen overnight. It requires inner work we've been exploring throughout this series, the shadow work, the prayer, the willingness to be changed. You cannot see the powers and principalities clearly if you're still being driven by your own unexamined fears and wounds. Thomas Merton, a monk who spent a lot of his life in contemplative prayer, was writing letters about civil rights and nuclear weapons from his hermitage in Kentucky. Henry Nouwen, one of the most tender and interior writers in the Christian tradition, kept insisting that the journey inward and the journey outward are really one movement. We're not called to save the world. That job's already taken. We're not called to fix everything. We're called to resist being conformed and to offer, wherever we are, from the edge of the inside of those systems, whatever small witness we can to the possibility of something different. Jesus said the kingdom of God is like yeast hidden in a lump of dough. It doesn't conquer, it doesn't dominate. It works from the inside, very quietly, until the whole thing is changed. I find myself returning to that image more than almost any other in the Gospels, probably because it asks so little of me and trusts so much to God's slow, hidden work. My job is to get into contemplative silence long enough to let the yeast do its work. That's our invitation, to be a little bit of yeast, to see clearly, to refuse to scapegoat, to trust that the love which made us is stronger than the systems that diminish us, and to hold with the well-known mystic Julian of Norwich the stubborn, well-earned hope that in the end, however long the end takes, all shall be well. Resurrection will come. Lewis once said that we are not merely observers of the story, we are characters in it. So until next time, fellow Inklings, may you live your part well, and may you always know that you are deeply loved by the author of it all.